Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Rachel.
Hey, y'all.
And Alex.
I'm back.
And we are fortunate to have a very special guest with us, Mr. Joshua Becker. He's known as an author and a philanthropist, a blogger. Your website is Becoming Minimalist, and so it's no surprise to anyone. That's kind of what you're here to talk to us about. Welcome, Josh.
It is my pleasure. I will talk about anything you ask me about. So,
oh gosh,
we're not stuck to minimalism.
I'm all yours. Thanks for the invitation. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So we always have three questions that we ask our guests. Our listeners are kind of familiar with hearing those questions asked. They're really questions made to just stump you and throw you off a little bit. The first one is, have you ever had a nickname? If so, what was it? Or what is it?
No, I cannot think of a nickname. Jared's little brother, maybe, was probably my nickname growing up, even though we're twins. He was always much bigger and taller and broader. So maybe that's the closest.
Okay. We'll refrain from calling you that.
Thanks. Appreciate it. I've been spending my whole life trying to outgrow it. So.
Okay. All right. The second question is, if you had a warning label, what would yours be? Warning, Joshua Becker, fill in the blank.
Warning, Joshua Becker, will probably attempt more sarcasm than you would expect.
I like it.
I tend to catch people if they don't know me and I'm saying things that I'm not actually serious about, but they don't know that, then I get myself.
Yeah, you and Alex will be able to get along really well.
So good.
Seems to be a bit of a love language around here. All right, third and final question is, what's the last book that you read?
What is the last book that I read? I am finishing a book right now called Live, Love Now by Rachel Macy Stafford. So that's the one I've been reading and enjoying. She's been challenging me in a lot of different ways, so appreciate it.
Awesome.
Cool.
Love it. And you have some CCC like history, right? So for our Christ community people, like there's people that aren't from Christ community that listen, but obviously that's where this comes out. And so I remember in 2009, I became an intern at Christ Community Church, and there was this little thing in the student center, like with photocopied pictures of people inside of there, like the legends of internship at, Christ Community Church. And I remember walking into my office every day, seeing your picture. So I don't know what all that history was. It was a little before I got there, but.
That's the intern wall of fame. Is it still anywhere to be found?
It is digital somewhere.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
They repainted. So.
I guess that's second best. What are you going to do? Christ Community Church changed my life. My life was drastically changed for the better at Christ Community. I grew up in South Dakota, went to high school in Wapaton, North Dakota. Summer before my senior year, I moved to Omaha, so I ended up graduating from Burke.
Yeah, me too. Sorry.
Nice. I knew I liked you. My family went to Christ Community. We had relatives. My mom's cousin was attending, so that would have been 1992. Started attending there, and my life was just dramatically changed in the youth ministry there at Christ Community. Attended there all through, finished high school and then all through college. Met my wife there, got married. And then when I graduated college, I did a 2-year internship in the student ministry. So 1998 and 99, something like that. And then I was a pastor for 15 years before doing what I'm doing now. So,
who'd you intern under?
So the pastor of student ministries was Kent Julian, and the high school pastor was Joe Derigo. And then we parted ways for a while. I went to pastor in Wisconsin and Vermont. And then meanwhile, Joe moved down here to Phoenix to plant a church. And when I was getting out of youth ministry, I moved down here and worked with Joe again for 2 years as the associate pastor. The church was, 5, 6 years old when I first got there. And then several years later, we started a nonprofit organization called The Hope Effect, and Joe is now the executive director of The Hope Effect. So he's the executive director of the nonprofit that we founded several years ago. And so all that to say, I am who I am today because of Christ Community and the people that I met.
That's awesome. You said South Dakota. Where'd you say in South Dakota again? I mean, I grew up in South Dakota, so I'm a little bit curious.
Beautiful. Aberdeen, okay. South Dakota. How about you?
I lived in Aberdeen for 2 years. I think when I was in the 4th and 5th grade, I lived there. Yeah.
So when would that have been? My family's still there.
Geez, that would have been, mid 90s ish. So early 90s. Yeah.
So my grandfather pastors in Aberdeen at the First Baptist Church, Harold Salem, Pastor Harold Salem. That's my grandfather. And then my uncle owns the McDonald's in town. And
oh, really?
Yes, my whole family's still there. So I make it back twice a year.
We don't want to relish too much in the 90s. Rachel won't understand what we're talking about. So.
I don't know. Yeah. I wasn't alive yet.
Okay. Well, we'll kind of dive into this interview a little bit here. I think like one of the questions that we had for you is just, where did the minimalism thing kind of start for you? Where did you first hear about it? What led you to it?
Yeah, so minimalism was never on the radar for me. I was, like I mentioned, I pastored for years, but I was living a pretty typical middle-class suburban life. So pay increase and a move led to a bigger house with more stuff. 12 years ago, my neighbor was the first one to ever use the word minimalism in front of me. It was a Saturday morning, and I was cleaning out my garage. My son was 5, my daughter was 2, and I had spent hours working on my garage, just clean everything out, spring cleaning, hosing everything down. It had taken most of the morning while my son was begging me to come play with him. And my neighbor was working on her house, and we just struck up a conversation. I started complaining about how much time and effort had gone into cleaning out the garage. And she says, that's why my daughter is a minimalist. She keeps telling me I don't need to own all this stuff. And I remember looking at the pile of dirty, dusty things in my driveway. I'd spent all morning cleaning and taking care of. And out of the corner of my eye, I could see my 5-year-old son swinging alone on the swing set in the backyard where he'd been all day, and suddenly had this realization that not only was everything I own not making me happy, which we would all say, right? We're not looking for happiness in our possessions. But I realized that not only were they not making me happy, but my things were actually taking me away from the very thing that did bring me happiness in life. And not just happiness, but joy and meaning and significance and fulfillment. And it's one thing to say our possessions aren't making us happy. It's something very different the moment we realize they might actually be keeping us from happiness. And so that was it. That started us on this journey 12 years ago.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. Rachel, do you have a question or anything? Alex, before, I don't want to just steal
No, I don't have a question, but I feel like I can kind of understand where he's coming from with that. One summer when I was in college, I actually went on like a 40-day backpacking trip out in Wyoming. And I mean, this is a little different experience, but I mean, we only had like our backpacks for 40 days. Like what was in our backpacks, like food and a tent and like clothes. And like, that was like one of the best summers of my life. And it was so cool because I didn't have like anything other than the things that I needed, but it was like such an amazing summer. And I enjoyed like being out there. And it was just kind of one of those experiences where like, man, like you really don't need a lot just to really enjoy life to the fullest. So I can totally kind of understand where you're coming from with that experience.
Yeah.
So, yeah. How does the journey of like, that aha moment, and then like where'd you go from there? Like, was it like an instant thing? Like, I've got kids around that age, and I get a lot of wild ideas, and then I go talk to my wife about it, and then she's like, "You're just an idiot," Like, how did that those steps start to progress inside of your life right there? Was she like sold? Did it take convincing? Did you sell your house right then? Like, how did you gradually take the plunge?
Yeah. Well, I can't comment on if most of your ideas are idiotic or not. So she might be right. For all I know. Okay. So if you could picture this, I had spent all morning outside cleaning the garage. We were just doing a Saturday morning spring cleaning. So my wife was inside and my daughter was 2. And so my wife had spent all morning inside cleaning, just refreshing the house after the winter. And so I came in and I think she was busy scrubbing the second bathtub or the third toilet of the day, and with my 2-year-old pulling at her pant leg the whole time. And I said, "You'll never guess what June just said. She said that we don't have to own all this stuff anymore." And Kim was like, "You know what? That sounds really good right about now." And so I think she would have been on board with it anyway, but I happened to catch her at a time where she was very much feeling the weight of all the things that we owned. And I don't think we usually notice the full burden that all of our possessions have become until we go on the backpacking trip for 40 days. And we're like, I just lived out of a backpack for a month and a half. Why do I need, dressers and all that stuff back at home? So it happened at the right time. For me, our time frame, it certainly wasn't an overnight deal for us. I usually divide our minimizing into 3 time frames. It took about 2 or 3 months for us to go through the lived-in areas of our home. So living room and kitchen and bathrooms and bedrooms and kids' rooms. Like that was a 8 to 12 week process. It took us 9 months if you want to start counting the garage and the basement and the shed, like all those things that you don't live in, but just take a lot of time to go through. And then we did end up moving into a smaller home, but that was 3 or 4 years later down the road, and got rid of even more stuff at that time. So some personalities do it overnight, but most people I think takes a little time.
So what did that look like? I mean, did you just go into your living room and say, all right, let's just get rid of half the stuff in here? Or like, I mean, I feel like you need like a system or something to do that.
Yeah, I've developed a bit of a system to help people do it. But the first thing I did was my car, because I was cleaning out the garage. I pulled my cars out of the garage to the street so I could clean it. And I pulled my car in that night and just a little more in tune, I think, to all the physical things that were around us. And I'm looking in the car and there are just so much stuff that I didn't need in my, like pairs of sunglasses and CDs I didn't listen to, and receipts and coins and ketchup packets and pens and water bottles and kids' toys and maps just all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And so literally, I grabbed everything out of my car except for like license and registration and maybe a pair of sunglasses. And I just pulled everything out and I set it in a bag. And the next morning, I got in my car. So it would have been Sunday morning. I was driving to church, and it felt so calm and so peaceful in my car to not have the red rubber ball rolling around in the back seat and all this clutter around me. I'm like, this feels great. Where else can I have this feeling? And so we went to the living room, and I'm looking around, and there's a stack of newspapers and a bunch of DVDs that no one watches, and shelves of decorations where we like some of them, but not most of them, and some kids' toys, and just all this stuff that didn't need to be in our living room. And so took it out and took, I don't know, an hour or so, and I sat down, and it felt so nice. Like, where else can we have this feeling? And so always like, what's the next room that I can accomplish this feeling in?
So did you start to notice the benefits of it right away, or was it something where you're kind of like, okay, that was nice for a little while, but maybe you started to accumulate more things in the short term without realizing it? So
probably two different questions there. Yes, I noticed the benefits right away. Like that very next morning when I sat in my car, I'm like, this is a much more freeing environment. Like this is a much more calm space, peaceful space than it was the day before. So I could notice it right away. I started the blog, becomingminimalist.com. I started that like that weekend, like the Monday, just as a place for me to write what we were getting rid of and what we were keeping. And as I go back and look at the archives, it was like 3 days later, I was posting about how this was going to save me money in the long run. Like, gosh, it just dawned on me. If I hadn't bought all this stuff in the first place, I would be at a much better spot financially than I am now. And just thinking about going forward, not having to buy things, man, like the sky's the limit financially. And so I noticed the benefits right away. As far as like really overcoming consumerism and overcoming the desire to buy things, it's a little different journey, I think. Like there's shelves and shelves of books about how to organize your stuff and how to declutter your home, but there's very few books at the bookstore about how to overcome consumerism in our lives. Although the Bible makes a pretty good case for it, but it's a different conversation, a different mindset. But I think the more we see the benefits of owning less, then the less likely we are to want to accumulate things going forward.
Well, you think about some of those books that are like organizing books and like decluttering books, it's actually kind of feeding into the like consumerism, because it's like, yeah, go out and buy all of these like containers that'll look so good in your pantry so you can put all your food in it, but it'll look better. And like, you know, you actually are buying more stuff just to organize all your stuff instead of like getting rid of things. And so it's funny.
Yeah. Courtney Carver says it this way: if you have to buy stuff to organize your stuff, you probably have too much stuff, which is
a lot of stuff.
So very true.
Yeah. One of the questions I have is like, so I watched, the documentary like years ago, and then that you were in on Netflix, and you came and spoke at the church during one of our things when I was an intern. And so I kind of got turned on to some of that stuff and went out and tried to exercise only so many pieces of clothing for like a month and, take some of those steps. But one of the things I ran into and do sometimes as a pastor is like how to like have these conversations and not like fully Jesus juke and just drive guilt into people, even though I think that's a good part of it, and trusting the Spirit to start doing it. And so how do you balance that part of like, no, there's a pretty clear call. And like you said, you can make a pretty compelling case in Scripture for not owning a lot of stuff in our possessions. And so how do you balance that?
So when I started blogging, I was a pastor for a pretty many years of both writing about this and pastoring at the same time. And I loved pastoring, and always thought I would do it my whole life. Maybe I'm just doing it in a different way now, I guess. But my blog, what I was writing, I was just journaling what was happening, what we were getting rid of, what we were keeping, what questions I was asking, what I was learning about myself, what I was noticing about the world and society, and writing these things. And one evening, I was on my blog and someone had left a comment under something I wrote. I can't remember what I wrote, but she said, hey, like, this is really life-changing thoughts you're putting out here. I never thought about these things in the way you're writing about them. Thank you so much for this. And she had left a link to her website. And so I clicked on it, as you do in blogs, you leave a link to your website. And so I clicked on it and I went to her website, and it was an entire website dedicated to witchcraft. Like, she was a Wiccan, and she had a whole website about witchcraft. And like, in that moment, I realized, hey, the benefits of owning less have benefits to people regardless of their faith or non-faith background. Regardless of what it is, owning less frees us up to pursue joy, and frees us up to pursue happiness in real and lasting ways. Whether everyone finds it in Christ, I don't know, but at least if they stop looking for happiness in possessions and money, then we can start looking somewhere else. And so I just started writing with that as the mindset. Always like, this has benefit to people regardless if they're Christian or not. So how do I phrase this in a way that someone who isn't a Christian isn't going to be turned off in the first couple paragraphs of what I'm writing? And what I really learned is two things. Number one, people are very much drawn to the messages in Scripture, even though they don't know it. Like, everything that Christ offers, joy and peace and hope and love, like, these are, and contentment and goodness and kindness, like, all these things people desire. If you tell them it's a verse in Galatians, then they're turning it off. But the things that Christ offers are the very things that the people are looking for. And then the second thing I learned really interestingly is that the truths in Scripture are true. And if they're true, then you can make a case for them without relying on Paul to do it. And so I can find plenty of studies that talk about the benefits of generosity, and I can find studies that talk about how relationships with other people is where we find more fulfillment in life, and in having wanting to make a difference and being significant. That all those things you can argue for, you can present without having to use the Bible necessarily as your proof text, which is enough for most Christians because of faith. But if you can't use the Bible as a proof text, you can still make a case for most of the principles in it.
That's good.
Yeah, it's really good.
So when you have started this minimalism journey and gotten into it, I feel like I've maybe done this a couple of times where I'm like, okay, I'm going to get rid of stuff, and then I'm going to, downsize, but then it's like, oh, and then you kind of slowly slip back into just like buying things and like accumulating things. Like, how have you kept yourself kind of motivated, or kept your mindset of like, we are going to do this. This is like our new lifestyle, and not maybe slid back into the consuming things?
I think on the surface, and I shouldn't minimize this whatsoever, but the fact that I became known for writing a blog about minimalism has very much served to keep me on that keep me on that track. Because I loved writing about it, and I believed it to be true. And because I was writing about it and thinking about it a lot and looking for new ways to write and present it, that I think that helped keep me on track for sure. But I'm pretty sure I would be living this way even if I wasn't blogging. I'm actually 100% sure I would be doing it. And it's because I have begun to see in the most clearest way that I possibly can how owning less frees me up to do more important things with my life. And because it's not just in all the things that we have accumulated and keep and have to clean and organize and manage and maintain and repair, and like all the time and effort that goes into all the things that we own. But when I start redirecting all the things that I'm even pursuing with my life, like if I'm not thinking all the time about what's the next thing that I want to buy, or how can I earn the money to buy the bigger house or the nicer car, when I start to redirect energy and talents and money and passion towards more meaningful things, the more I do that, the more I can see that life is just worth more than chasing and accumulating material possessions. And so are there times where I slide back and end up making a few mistakes and buying things that shouldn't be bought? Like, sure. I mean, that happens. But I hope the overarching trajectory of my life is towards just seeing that it's worth more than those things.
Awesome.
So one question I had too is just like with family, and I know you're a dad, so you have 2 kids, right? Is that correct?
2 kids, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, kids are kind of notorious hoarders. They like, it's with whether family members are getting them Christmas presents or you're buying them toys or whatever it is. Is that something that's been difficult? Like, do they compare themselves to other kids and go like, why does so-and-so have so many toys and we don't? Or is that something that you kind of, I mean, I'm not sure of their ages, but is that something that you kind of let them manage themselves a little bit, or how does that work?
Probably yes and no to everything. So my son was 5 and my daughter was 2, and now they are 17 and 14. And I think if my kids were teenagers and I first heard about minimalism, and I raised my kids for 15 years in this one specific lifestyle, and I come home one day and I'm like, we're changing everything, it would have been a pretty hard sell at that point in their lives. But because they were 5 and 2 when we started, it was a little bit easier to guide them in that direction. And like, hey, this is what our family deems important, and this is what our family's culture is, and this is what we spend money on, and this is where we don't spend money, and always explaining to them why. I'm a big fan of over explaining to kids, particularly as parents. Like, I think we should be able to explain all of our decisions to them. And if we can't explain it, then maybe they have a point, and it wasn't a decision that we need to, hold so strongly to. So always, I think, explaining to them, the older they get, the more they're able to understand, hey, this is why we don't have, we still get gifts for Christmas, but this is why we don't have a big pile of gifts under the Christmas tree, because we're using our money for these things. And this is why we have a smaller house than some of your friends might, because this is where our money goes, and this is what we do, and this is what we support. So I think that over time they've learned that. I don't know what they'll do when they're on their own, right? I guess that's all of parenting, right? We set the example as best we can, and we reinforce values as best we can, and then ultimately they have the freedom to choose what they want when they get older. But no matter what they choose, they can always come back to what they saw growing up and what their life was growing up. And so I don't know, I think I've made the case for minimalism with them, but I guess we'll see for sure in the long run. One other comment though about what kids see, what other people have, like it's always helpful to remember that there are always going to be kids that have more. Mm-hmm. Like you're never going to, I always say you can't outspend envy. Mm-hmm. Like they can want one thing because all their friends have it, but if you buy it, there's just going to be something else that they want down the road. And Christmas gifts and birthday gifts and the size of your house, or if you have a pool, or if you don't, or if you have the latest greatest phone, like it never ends. You can't outspend that emotion and that attitude. You just have to explain why you make the decisions that you do, and help them see that.
Yeah. How's it work? And I think obviously you've got a blog and all that, so people can get, if they're like intrigued by this, they can find out a lot more questions. Like there's a million that are popping in my mind, but how's that changed in like a digital world? Just because I think we live in a world that possessions are maybe becoming smaller and less, but then it's moving digitally, right? And so like that was easy with CDs to kind of see your stack dwindle, but now with like a Spotify or apps on your phone, you're still possessing them, you're still working towards owning them. The world's become increasingly digital since even you've begun this journey. So how have you seen some of that transition for you?
So, technology certainly makes minimalism easier today than ever before. In the palm of my hand, I can have, like you said, music and movies and photos and credit cards and maps and notebooks and like everything I can have in the palm of my hand. Not to mention just how like the whole sharing economy that has emerged because of technology and sharing, whether it's cars or houses or tools or anything, right? Like it's so much easier there's less need to own stuff, at least as much stuff today. So I'm a big fan of it. That being said, anything can become a distraction in life, and ultimately that's what minimalism is. Minimalism is intentionally promoting what is most important by removing anything that distracts me from it. So minimalism really isn't about what I'm removing from my life. It's about what I'm adding. It's about what I now can direct my finite resources towards, that matter in the long run. And so technology can obviously become a huge distraction. Social media can be a distraction. The collection of technology can become a distraction. The way we use technology can become a distraction, just in terms of how many apps am I using, and all the digital clutter that I'm holding on to. And so I think we run it through the same filter. Like what problem is this solving in my life? Is this thing, whether it be a digital software or whether it be a new purchase, does this help me become more of what God wants me to become? Does this help me accomplish what my purpose is in life? Or is this just becoming something that's distracting me from it?
That's good. Yeah, because I think I love technology and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes that is the core thing. I'm like making the excuse that I'm owning less by having this, but I'm more distracted than ever. So that's a good word. So what problem does this solve? That was the question that one person gave me one time. Patrick Rohn asked me that question. I'm like, that's a good filter when it comes to technology, because sometimes it does, right? Like sometimes it does solve problems.
Other times it just seems to add to them.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, are you noticing more people than usual maybe contact you or reach out to you because of this time of quarantine, and they're kind of drowning in their own things for, day after day, and going, wait, maybe it's kind of staring you in the face. You don't get to go to work and ignore it. Like, are you noticing that at all, or is it not really that different?
Yeah, you know what? To be honest, I thought I would notice more of that. I thought when shelter in place orders were starting to come down and things were closing, I'm like, man, this is going to be a golden age for the blog. And I found it not to be much different than it was before.
Yeah.
And we launched an app. We had an app that we were launching in March, and I'm like, this thing's going to be number one by the end of the day. And about what we expected it to be. It wasn't anything greater than that. And I think honestly that, a couple things are come into play, but probably the biggest one I think is just a lot of anxiety, like real life anxiety about finances and health, like life and death questions and worry that's on people's minds. And I don't know do I have too many pairs of shoes in my closet is that big of an issue for people when they're genuinely worried about life or death, and if they're going to be able to make the next rent payment. I think someone who had embraced minimalism before all of this happened is probably in a better spot, right? Like their home is already more calm and a little more peaceful, and they may have built up a few more finances because of not overspending along the way. And maybe as people come out of this and they're like, okay, we're going to be okay. Life's going to get back to normal. I need to make some changes around here going forward. What's that going to look like? So maybe it will be that, and just Goodwill's being closed, and people not being able outside their house, like a lot of different things I think have kind of emerged. But certainly I hope people are always asking themselves these questions.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's good.
So
I know
if someone, sorry.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Go, Rachel.
I was just thinking, if someone is listening to this and maybe they've never heard of minimalism before, or they are kind of interested now, what would you suggest is like the very first thing that someone should do if they're like interested in maybe kind of taking steps towards minimalism?
I would say go minimize the possessions in the easiest, most lived in area of your home. Because a lot of people hear about decluttering or minimizing, and like they think of the garage or the basement or the attic, or like their stacks of paper in the office, and they can go spend hours working in one area and not see any progress after hours and be like, this isn't for me, and just quit out of frustration. But if you go spend 2 hours in your bedroom or in the living room, like you can make a pretty significant difference. Most people could probably even finish the room in that amount of time, even if you just take out a fifth of the things or a fourth of the things in that room, and then at the end of the day, you'll be able to feel it. Like Randy Alcorn says, every increased possession adds increased anxiety onto our lives, and like you can just feel it on your shoulders in a cluttered space compared to a calm space. And so creating that area, having that sense of completion, and then moving to the next space. And then also, we talked a little bit about kids, like don't go home and make your kids get rid of all their stuff. Like don't go home and make your spouse get rid of all their stuff. Like you gotta go first. You gotta do your own things before you make anyone else in your home get rid of their things.
Yeah.
That's some wise words there.
Yeah, indeed.
Foiled my afternoon plans. I was texting, getting a dumpster here, throwing all my kids' stuff out, but change of plans. Yeah, that's so good. Thanks for sharing some of that wisdom. What are like practical steps that people, that want to connect more, or like you mentioned an app, like all those kind of things? What are things that they can do to find out a little bit more if they have more questions? I know some people sent in some questions, and you've answered some of them through the conversation. But if somebody's like, man, I want to try this, what would you say to go do right now? First thing to do.
I would say, go clean out something somewhere. I like finishing a space like that, like a living room or a bedroom, a bathroom, perhaps, something like that. I mean, obviously becomingminimalist.com is home for me, and there's plenty of resources, and the app is called Clutter Free, and I have books, The More of Less and The Minimalist Home. And so there's like a lot of different resources that people can find. So if they're looking for that, I certainly have plenty of them. But I always just think back, like I don't know, I had a conversation with my neighbor, and I'm like, I'm in. How am I going to make this work in my home and in my life?
Mm-hmm.
So I try to make it work, but other people like reading a little bit more. So plenty of the Facebook group's like 1.8 million people. So there's a lot of conversations going on about owning less.
Wow.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. Oh,
go ahead. We're going to keep talking over each other. This is how it works.
I was just going to say, I think that's a great point, that you kind of do it. You make it work for, your family, for you. Like, you're not following some strict guidelines of like, okay, we're going to have 5 of this. And I think when you start to do that, it can get overwhelming, and people are like, I'm not even going to try because I just can't attain, that goal or whatever. So I think that's a great point of just make it your own, do the best you can with what you have. And
Yes, I would agree. Minimalism is always going to look different from one person to another and one family to another, based on size of the family, where you live, what your job is. Like, it's always going to look different from one person to another. Jesus even called different people to different. He calls the disciples to give up everything and follow him, and he tells the demon-possessed man that he healed, he was like, I'm ready to go. And he goes, no, go back and live in your home and, be my witness in the city. And so God even calls us to different levels there as well.
Yeah, that's good.
I just have one really important question. Is there one thing that you got rid of that to this day you're kind of still regret, that you're like, man, I wish I would have held on to that thing? No, my wife got upset because I threw away some football-shaped Jell-O molds that she had bought for my son's sports-themed birthday party, but we just had football field-shaped Jell-O rather than football-shaped Jell-O. And it's a pretty big regret.
I have found that most things, almost everything, if I do get rid of it and I end up needing, that something else solves the problem, or someone else has it and I can borrow it from them. It's people very much get caught up in this. Well, what if I get rid of it and I end up needing it someday? But I think the bigger question is like, well, what if you hold on to everything going forward? Like what life are you missing out on by keeping everything?
Yeah.
As opposed to, what's the one thing that I'm going to have to end up replacing that I can pick up at Walmart in 10 minutes if I actually do end up needing it.
Yeah.
Hopefully they have those Jell-O molds in stock.
Yeah, right.
One of the things that I'm always curious about as a pastor is pride can slip into my heart pretty easily, especially when I'm living, maybe a life that I would label more holy than others, or, rejecting other things. And so I can look at my life as sanctification process happens and things like that, and then begin to look at other people's lives and I know the solution to your problem. Would you just listen to me? And I can become prideful about that kind of stuff. So how in your life have you noticed, pride creep up, and how do you keep that from creeping up when like, here's a practical solution, neighbor or mom or family member, that really could set you free? How do you keep pride from dwelling up in your heart and leading into those conversations and relationships?
Yeah, well, certainly humility is what keeps us from becoming proud. And Humility emerges, I think, whenever we take a good look at ourselves and know ourselves well, and know that maybe I don't struggle with this sin anymore, but I know full well I've got this sin that I'm dealing with and that sin that I'm dealing with, and I'm in no position to think of myself better than others. I think that's where that creeps in. And gosh, like husbands and wives, right? Like, gosh, I can't get the wife is like, I'm trying to become minimalist, but my husband wants nothing to do with it, and I'm getting so frustrated, and I just keep bouncing back with, okay, humility, right? Like you're not perfect. Like there's probably some things your husband wants to change about you that you're not budging on. And so like, let's keep that in mind in married relationships, and let's keep that in mind in our own relationship with God as well, that there are still plenty of sins that I'm dealing with in my own life that hopefully keep me from becoming too proud. And maybe I can see something that my neighbor should be doing different or could be doing different, but that doesn't mean that God isn't working on something else in that person's life. And so maybe they're not, overcoming consumerism like I wish that they were, but that doesn't mean that God isn't still molding them into the image of Christ in some different way that I don't notice and I don't see. And again, same thing with husbands and wives. Gosh, I wish my husband would be more organized or would want to be more minimalist. And how come he can't see it? Well, like maybe God's doing something different in his life right now at the moment, and he's working on you in this way, and he's working on your husband, your wife, your neighbor, your friend in a different way.
Good. It's really good.
Yeah, it's really good. Anybody else? Rachel, Alex, do you guys have any other questions that you feel like that left unanswered?
No, I'm just going to go check out the website.
Yeah. No. Joshua, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. I guess I'm not sure how much more or less time you have on your hands during the unprecedented times of quarantine that we all are dealing with, but thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you guys and love Christ community and love Jesus. So I'm in to do whatever I can to help.
That's awesome. No, thank you. Thanks everyone for listening and tuning in today, wherever you might be. If you have any questions or you want to reach out to us, you can do that on social media at CCC Omaha, or you can send an email to this podcast. The email address is podcast@cccomaha.org. We'd love to hear from you, whether it's questions, concerns, ideas for other shows, or even other guests that you'd like to see on here. And you mentioned your website, Joshua. Did you have any other resources, a book or anything like that you'd like to point people to, or is kind of the website the one-stop shop?
The website is home base for everything.
Okay, so that's becomingminimalist.com.
Yeah, becomingminimalist.com.
Okay, all right, great. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a good week.